Bend Around the Wind by Skylia. Chapter 91. Faith in Strength. Hadjin only had enough ingredients left for 2 more locator spells. They knew from his last spellcasting that Loki was still on the other's ship and that they were still on the move. It was of course more comforting than words could ever describe how it felt for him to know that Loki was still alive. But at the same time, it would have been better if they had already arrived to where they were heading to. He feared they would still be moving when he ran out of ingredients, and then he would not have the means to find Loki again. The thought churned his stomach, turning it into a heavy ball of nerves and dread. His magic tightened under his skin. It shuddered and pulsated constantly, making his hands shake more and more frequently. Loki was not there to help him get rid of the excess amount of energy without violent outbursts. The locator spell was hardly enough to tire him out. He knew he should have used his magic for something else as well, to relieve at least some of the stress on his body, but he feared that no matter his intentions, his magic would turn ferocious from his anger and worry. Only a fool would have risked this ship and all its passengers with something like unruly magic wielding. The new ship was nothing like the Iron Mage. The interior was clearly thrown together in haste and not built with the intention to host several people for a long period of time. They had no separate rooms, just 2 lines of beds on both sides of one of the larger separated areas that divided the whole ship. Not that anybody cared. Everything was for necessity, not comfort. Everything was brand new, but incredibly simple and without much fanfare. Despite the lack of privacy, Hedgett felt like he was alone as he sat on his bed, his feet on the floor and his elbows on his knees. His temper was worse than ever, and even Juyu gave up on having any sort of conversation with him. Nobody else even tried, because they knew they would only get harsh words in return for their trouble. Then there was Thor. Hedgett wasn't sure if he ever found him so infuriating before. There was just something about having him around that made Hedgett's magic flare in irritation. He did not know what it was exactly that bothered him so much. He did not search for reasons, for he did not need reasons. Everything and everyone bothered him, and his magic was beyond unsettled because of it. It made him constantly alert, even when he would have preferred to rest. It put him on edge, even when he attempted to relax. It kept him awake when he needed to sleep. It burnt under his skin in distress, vibrating unpleasantly, making his already rotten mood worse. That was, of course, why everybody on the ship gave him a wide berth. Except for Thor. Hedgett would have much preferred if the Thunderbird would have remained in the company of his fellow Avengers. But no, for some reason, he insisted on giving Hedgett some company once in a while, as if that could have possibly made anything better at all. So this time, when Thor sat down on the next bed right in front of him, mirroring his pose, Hedgett looked up with his most venomous glare, staring at the Aesir coldly. Thor huffed tiredly in reaction and pointed at Hedgett's face. I cannot decide whether you learnt that look from Loki, or if it is the other way around, he said. Hedgett narrowed his eyes. What is this, Odinson? He asked. Thor sighed. You say that as if trading a few words is such an offense. If you are under the impression that we are suddenly comrades or friends, then you are sorely mistaken, Hedgett told him. You can save your words for your brothers in arms, he added, nodding his head where Steve and Bucky were talking quietly. Thor rubbed at his eyebrow while he was searching for words. Hedgett's patience already ran out, though he was not in the mood for whatever Thor wanted this time. What do you want? He asked bluntly. Why must I want anything just for trying? Trying what? I don't need you to try being anything. I don't like you. I can barely stand you on most days. So how about you relieve me of your presence before I happen to scorch the hair off your head? His voice was low and he almost hissed out the words, his magic glimmering at his fingertips with a violet glow. Or just frowned at him. I would have believed that at least now of all times we would have an understanding. We have a common goal, a common enemy, and the very same feelings are darkening our thoughts. They are not the same, Hedgett hissed in a low voice. Don't even try to presume that what we feel is the same. He raised his voice so probably others heard him as well, but he didn't give a damn. Thor and his presumptions, his need to search for camaraderie, as if Hatchet was one of his Aesir drinking pals he chased witches with. Thor's face darkened at last, but not in the sort of furious anger Hatchet would have expected.
Maybe not, but this pain, do not try to claim it as your own.
He rumbled quietly.
Do not pretend that you're the only one who feels it. You have not the right.
Hatchet stared at him for a moment, torn between wanting to simply shout and do something much more severe. But then suddenly the fight went out of him altogether. Why was he even wasting his words? What did it matter what Thor thought? Hatchet had other things to be worried about. Just like every time since the first day, as soon as his mind drifted back to Loki, he saw no point in arguing. "What do you want, Thor?" he asked again, quietly this time. His anger was gone for the moment.
Believe it or not, it is concern for your well-being, but I should not have bothered,
Thor answered sternly, moving to stand up. Hatchet wanted to bite his tongue and let him walk away, but he did not succeed. "Just sit and speak your mind," he said. "You should be better at handling scalding words than this." It may have not been much, but it was the only welcoming gesture he could offer in his state of mind. Thor stood silently for a moment, considering it. He was visibly undecided about whether to leave or not. He sat down again eventually.
You are more irritating than Loki ever was,
he said, grumbled really. Hatchet smiled tiredly. "Thank you!" Thor chose to ignore that. The Thunderer sat on the bed silently for long moments, and Hatchet did not have the urge to interrupt the silence between them. He knew Thor was preparing himself to speak, so he waited, almost curious what this was about.
I worry for Loki,
Thor said then, like it was not something everyone already knew.
For his life as well, of course, but I fear more for the soundness of his mind.
Hatchet shook his head, but Thor continued before he could say anything.
He's been through so much,
Thor said.
He suffered at the hands of these vermin repeatedly. For him to be back at their clutches.
Loki's strong. Stronger than you might think, Hatchet said.
I know how strong he is.
Thor looked at him pointedly.
I do not doubt for a second that many would have been long beyond saving. Many would have long lost not just their mind, but also their very soul, but...
Eventually everything breaks, Hatchet finished, leaving it as a question. It was like a law of nature. No matter how well you bend under pressure, in the end you break or shatter. Thor nodded.
I did believe him to be broken already,
he admitted quietly.
I had not much hope left.
And are you losing hope again?
I fear what we will find when we finally reach him,
Thor said. I'm not, Hatchet said. Loki is Loki. I don't care about anything else. He just needs to be alive. Only that matters to me, that he is alive. They were both silent for long moments, and Hatchet immediately tried to take control of himself again. He was truly too much on the edge if he spoke such words in front of Thor, of all people.
I owe you an apology,
Thor said after a little while. What for? Hatchet asked, trying to sound more composed than he felt.
For belittling your bond for so many years,
Thor said.
I have never believed that you were truly important to Loki. I know now that I was gravely mistaken, and I regret my ignorance. You have my apologies.
Hatchet wanted to dismiss the words easily, just brushing it aside, but the huff came out wrong. It turned into a completely different sound, something weak and strangled. But you were not wrong, he said. He linked his fingers together to make the sparks of magic disappear from around his hands. Thor frowned at him. It is true now, but it was not always so. I was not that important back then. Thor opened his mouth, maybe to protest, maybe to say something else, but Hatchet spoke quickly and silenced him with a shake of his head. He spent merely a fortnight or a month, once every year in Alfheim, Hatchet reminded Thor. He craved attention Asgard had not given him, and I had given him that quite freely. He shrugged. Read not too much into it. It was not pleasant to think of their past like that, but Hatchet was not fond of deluding himself. He was fond of my company, the knowledge I shared, my loyalty, and the praises I showered him with, but it never stretched beyond those few short weeks. I was like Free's castle, like the mages of the court, or Wolves Woods, something that always awaited him when he visited. Things that generally mattered very little when he was home in Asgard. He did not say this bitterly, for there was nothing to be bitter about. Hatchet was fond of the times they did manage to spend in each other's company, and he had gained much from their companionship even when Loki was far away. He may have been an abominable creature in the eyes of many, something most elves looked down on in Alfheim, but he was still allowed certain courtesies just for being Loki's friend. Everything was different now, of course, but one should still not look back at the past and imagine things that were not there at the time. Thor seemed to disagree, though.
I may have been blind to many things,
He said,
but I believe I know how much you meant to my brother. And if you think you were ever forgotten when Loki was back in Asgard, then you are being a fool.
The words were kind, meant to be a reassurance, and yet he looked up at Thor and caught his gaze before he spoke again. Do you know what it's like to watch something slip away from your grasp? He asked. Thor's face immediately darkened as if a shadow was cast upon him. Hatchet knew what memories flashed in his mind, what made him look so haunted, lost in a moment that long passed.
Aye,
He said slowly. First you stopped visiting Alfheim, Hatchet said, and I knew right away that things were coming to an end. He continued, having Thor's full attention again. And sure enough, one day the Bifrost lit up the sky, but only Queen Frigga stepped out of the light. Hatchet remembered the look on her face when she showed up all on her own, just her guards around her and neither of her sons. She smiled at her brother as always, excused the absence of Thor and Loki easily, but that look on her face when she finally glanced at Hatchet, that was when he knew for certain that Loki would not return again. The decades after, he started to say, but fell silent and shook his head. It did not matter anymore. Those times were long gone.
were you angry?
Thor asked, sounding younger all of a sudden. At Loki? Hatchet asked in return. Then he huffed as he shook his head again. No, Norn told me I could never be truly angry at that brat. He smiled fondly at how true his words were. He had moments of extreme annoyance, but never true anger. If Loki would have suddenly shown up in Alfheim again during those years, Hatchet would have had some choice words for him, but he would have greeted him with a smile all the same. He would have showered him with attention and praises, lectures and tales, jests and wisdom, just as always, exactly the way he did when he finally found him again on that crowded street in Delicanium. There had been no anger, just joy.
It was no fault of yours that he stayed away,
Thor said. Oh, how very well Hatchet knew that. Hatchet! Thor! Juyu called, and they both turned around to look at her. Stark and Drongo want to see you, she said, beckoning them to follow. Hatchet only now noticed that Steve and Bucky were gone as well. Everyone must have been in the control room. Thor stood up first, but Hatchet followed shortly behind, shaking off the melancholy immediately as he straightened his back. The way Juyu looked at him told him that he was not fooling anyone, but she said nothing. Just waited until Hatchet caught up with her to walk beside him. When they entered, the control room was filled with a holographic display of a star map, slightly smaller just than the one Hatchet used for his first locator spell. Everyone was gathered around Stark and Drongo. Bee, Brody, and Bruce were a little closer, while Steve, Bucky, and now Thor stood by the wall. Juyu and Hatchet walked up to Stark as well. Stark looked as worn as Hatchet felt, only he was human, so it was easier to notice the dark circles under his eyes and the paleness of his skin. He was collectively forced and pressured into sleeping a couple of times now, but he never stayed down for long. It was the determination Hatchet could read on his face that probably managed to keep him on his feet. And yet he did not look like someone who could fall over any moments. Quite the contrary. He looked as strong and resolute as ever. So what's this about? Hatchet asked. Stark was frowning, and there was something more in his expression than the amount of concern and worry Hatchet came to expect while looking at him. Drongo reached out to point at something on the giant holographic display.
Stark and I have found ourselves disagreeing, and while I understand his reasons, I insist that you are all informed about this properly,
he said.
This is where we are right now,
He continued, his finger hovering.
and this is where we are going at the moment.
He continued and took a few steps back to point at a different part of the map.
And this,
He said, pointing at an ellipsoidary-shaped swarm of stars not that far away from their current end destination.
is the Fornax galaxy.
Drongo's home planet, Sakar, is there, Bruce added doubtfully for everyone who did not know that. Okay, so why is this relevant at the moment? Rhodey asked.
Loki and Stark have done a great service to our people.
Drongo said.
In such a time of need, my brothers and sisters would not hesitate to aid us in return.
You want us to make a detour, Hadget said. We can't afford to waste time like that. That's what I said, Stark said right away.
My friends,
Drongo said calmly.
we are all deeply concerned about Loki, but we do not know the numbers of enemies waiting for us. The other may have worked alone when he attacked Earth, but now he could be returning to his master and his armies. We simply do not know.
We are already far behind them, Hadget said. I can only perform 2 more locator spells. If we idle and they slip away...
We would not idle.
Drongo said.
We do not need to land on Sakar. We just need to get close enough so that I can send a message to my people.
Sounds reasonable, Steve said. But we don't have the time, Stark said, almost shouted. We could be already too late. We can't risk falling behind even more. But what if they kill us all before we can get close enough to the other? Bucky asked suddenly, pushing himself away from the wall he was leaning on a moment ago. What if we get there in time, but can't fight them all because there's just too many of them and we have no backup? If you didn't want to take the risk, then you shouldn't have come. Stark snapped at him. We are all aware of the risks, Tony, Steve said. We accepted them and decided to come anyway. Look, we had no options when we left Earth. There was no way we could have brought more people, but this is different. Do we even know if they can help us? Juyu asked. Last time we were there, the Red King was still on the throne.
It's been years,
Drongo said.
Carrera had no reason not to strike once the children were safe. The Red King is dead. I am absolutely certain of that.
And are you also absolutely sure that they would be willing to help? Rhodey asked. Stark looked at him as if betrayed, but Rhodey just put up a placating hand and waited for Drongo's answer.
You must know that Loki did not save just my life when he met me on my planet. The crew did not just welcome me, but saved the lives of countless innocents too.
He first looked at Stark when he said that, but then he turned to look at Juyu and B, nodding at them as well.
What they had done ensured our victory over the cruel Red King.
And Loki was the one who insisted we help you.
B added.
And Carrera will be more than willing to help a friend of our people. Not just Loki, but you, Stark, and Juyu and B as well. The Shadow People do not forget those who stood by our side.
Loki! Hadget started.
The other will not kill my brother.
Thor spoke up, interrupting him.
Not for a long while, you said it yourselves.
Are you willing to risk it? Stark asked him. What if we get there and we're too late? Huh? Too late because of this.
What if we cannot reach him because we do not take the risk?
Thor asked in return.
My brother is strong.
And prolonging his suffering, does that not matter either? Hadget asked.
I believe that you will agree with me when I say that Loki would rather suffer more than to see any of you dead.
Ah! Damn you! Hadget cursed and clenched his fists to rein in his magic. It was pulsating dangerously close to the surface.
How big a detour are we talking about here?
Bruce asked.
Depends where the other will go next.
Drongo said.
We need to see in which direction they are moving before we can reset our route.
I did not agree to this yet, Stark said. Tony, you gotta think clearly about this, Rhodey said. It doesn't matter if we're on time if we can't get him out.
We don't even know if there will be any significant resistance,
Stark said. We also don't know if there will be one, Steve said. The other is heading somewhere to a hideout to get a new set of troops or back to Thanos himself. We don't know. He has an advantage over us here, we like it or not. If this can tip the scales in our favor, raise our chances to defeat him and get Loki out, we should do it.
Stark, it would not take that long,
Drongo said. Okay, screw this. We're voting. Me and my crew, not the rest of you. Stark said, I say no. Drongo is yes, so... He raised his hand and gestured at Hatchet, then Juyu and B, prompting them to answer. Hatchet stayed resolutely silent, so Stark looked at the girls instead.
No,
B said almost immediately.
I think we are strong enough to reach Loki and free him on our own, if we get there in time.
Stark nodded and turned to Juyu. I'm with Drongo, she said after taking a large breath. Loki would want us to think, not charge in all guns blazing like madmen. If we can get extra muscles, we should take the extra muscles and make sure we are able to deal with the other permanently. There was a moment of silence, and Hatchet could feel how everyone's eyes shifted over to him, even if he was too busy staring at the Fornax galaxy on the star map to check. Hatchet? Stark questioned. Hatchet finally turned and took in everyone's faces. He wanted to start with Stark. He really did. But then his eyes lingered on Thor for a moment. He wanted to curse and rage, destroy, or kill something. He would get his chance, he knew that well. It was only a matter of time, and Loki was strong. So very strong. What Loki would want was even clearer to him. Get Drongo's people, he said, and make it quick. He immediately turned to leave, not wanting to speak another word about this, lest he change his mind. Some part of him was already regretting the decision. Loki was strong. Loki would not want them to be stupid just because they were worried about him. Loki was going to be well. He had to be. They were going to get there in time and find him hale and whole. Hatchet, Thor called after him on the short corridor leading to the sleeping area. He stopped but did not turn around. How angry is Stark? Hatchet asked for some reason.
He is blinded by his worry,
Thor said.
But he will change our route so that we may pass the car on our way.
If Stark would have been completely against the idea, he would not have agreed to change routes, no matter what anyone said. The thought was not as reassuring or comforting as Hatchet hoped it would be.
Hatchet, have faith in Loki's strength,
Thor said after a long stretch of silence. But you just told me that you fear what we will find. Hatchet turned around, gesturing vehemently. His hands were shaking again.
Aye, but I would fear for him even more if either of you perished while trying to free him,
Thor said. Everything breaks eventually, Hatchet said quietly.
I thought that once,
Thor said.
And I was wrong. Metal breaks, and so does stone. But not the wind, not an open flame. Not Loki.
It was something Hatchet would have said himself at any other time. He turned away again. He ran his hand down his face, then back up into his hair, which was still irritatingly stained with blonde locks, gripping it tightly in frustration. If I'm wrong, he started to say quietly.
You are not,
Thor said resolutely. It's different now than it used to be, Hatchet said. Not even 2 years, and yet we've been through more than ever. We're closer than ever. The words died on his lips, and he had to suck in a breath to be able to speak again. I just cannot lose this. Him. Not now, he managed to say. Not after everything. He only noticed that his body was trembling from the strain his magic was putting on it when Thor's heavy hand landed on his shoulder. That's when he became truly aware of how bad it had gotten. The weight of Thor's hand was not like Loki's touch. It did not calm his magic right away, but still some of the tension suddenly snapped and slipped away. The tremors shaking his bones also vanished. After a moment or two, even his hands stopped trembling.
We won't,
Thor said with absolute certainty. It was maybe foolish or naive, but Hatchet was willing to believe him. Just this once.